Hello, AP Environmental Science students. This is Easton from the AP Guide. Today we'll be talking about AP Environmental Science, Unit 1, Introduction to Ecosystems. Whether you're self-studying or taking the real class, this is a good way to show you an introduction to AP Environmental Science Unit 1. And it will also help you cap off your review for your AP exams. I'll be doing one of these every day for each unit, and then finally a review for important terms you need to know for AP Environmental Science. So, the first term you need to know is ecosystem. So, ecosystems are living and non-living components interacting as a system. So, think like your backyard is an ecosystem because living and non-living things are interacting. Insects are acting with the ground. They're interacting with other stuff as well. So these living things, such as grass or your bugs in your garden, they are biotic because they are living things. However, the non-living things, such as soil, concrete, it's abiotic because it's non-living. Predators hunt prey, and this is a biotic interaction. Biotic interactions are when a biotic organism interacts with another biotic organism. And when a biotic organism interacts with a non-biotic organism or an abiotic organism, it's an abiotic interaction because an abiotic thing is interacting with a biotic thing. So, we need to learn about the symbiosis relationships, and this is the main thing we need to learn about in this chapter. One of the three main things is symbiosis relationships, and there's three of them. The first one is mutualism. So mutualism, we got a sea anemone and a clownfish here. So mutualism is a symbiosis relationship where both species benefit. In this case, the sea anemone is gaining multiple things from having this clownfish around. I really can't name it off the top of my head, so sorry about that. But as well, the clownfish is gaining protection because of the sea anemone. And it's also gaining like a home. And the second form of symbiosis is commensalism. So it's a symbiosis relationship where one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor benefited. In this case, the little ox right here, or I don't know, it is getting benefited while the birds are not benefited or harmed, because the birds actually warn the ox or this creature of the animal that there's predators coming. So the ox benefits while the birds do not benefit or do not gain anything from it, but they do help out the other species. And finally, the other one, we got this poor fish is getting invaded by a parasite. And this is parasitism. So parasitism is a symbiosis relationship where one species benefits and the other is harmed. So another example of this is a mosquito drinking your blood. You know, the other species is harmed while the mosquito is benefited by drinking your blood. So finally, we got competition. This is the second of the main three things you need to know for environmental science for Unit 1. We got two types of competition. The first in which it occurs when one species occurs within one species. So it's when they fight for the same limiting resource. And that species, the species that is the fittest survives. So think it occurs within one species. And they all fight for the same resource. So, and it's one limiting resource. And a limiting resource is a biotic or abiotic resource that could potentially stop a population from growing. So think like food, water, stuff like that. Now, interspecific competition occurs when a different species fights over a shared limiting resource. So the same thing as intraspecific competition, but it occurs within multiple species. Now we need to learn about resource partitioning. So resource partitioning occurs when a species uses limiting resources in different ways, places, or times in order to reduce competition. So think about how humans do this and keep that in your mind when taking the AP exam. if you ever see the word resource partitioning. You partition your resources and spread it out over multiple days. So say if you are the last human on Earth, theoretically, you want to partition your resources and spread it out. You don't want to eat every day. Maybe you eat every other day or drink every other day. You really just partition and spread everything out. So think spread out when you hear resource partitioning. So next up, we're going to talk about the biosphere. So this is our third and final thing you mainly need to know, which is cycles and food chains and stuff like that. So a biosphere is any living organism on Earth. Like, it's just multiple living organisms. So as you see right here, this whole thing is a biosphere. Next up, we got decomposition. So decomposers return carbon and CO2 to soil, water, and the atmosphere. So when decomposers eat a dead animal, it resembles decomposition because they return the CO2 to the natural soil, so the soil gains nutrients, water, so the water gains CO2, and then finally the atmosphere. And we'll learn more about that when we talk about the carbon cycle later in this unit. Alright, so now we got the levels of ecology. So we got the biome at the top because this is the biggest thing. So think a whole jungle. Then we got your ecosystem, like we talked about earlier. It's more specifics, like your backyard. Then we got a community. This occurs within the ecosystem. So, like, maybe it's like by your pool or by your stove. Then we got the population of specific species. So there might be multiple populations in the community, but there's one population, say, of like ants, rather than just ants, beetles, stuff like that. And then finally, we got organism. So it's just focused on one specific organism within the population, which is inside the community, which is inside the ecosystem, which is inside a biome. Now, there's different types of biomes as well. And the first one we're going to be talking about is terrestrial biomes. So terrestrial biomes vary in temperature, precipitation, and latitude. And temperature and precipitation directly impact latitude and altitude. As well, terrestrial biomes get more hotter and humid, which means they get more biodiversity. This also applies to aquatic biomes. So they don't vary by temperature and precipitation because if you think aquatic biomes, it is precipitation. And the light is mainly what varies the temperature. Therefore, it's varied by nutrients and light. Now we got everyone's favorite part, the cycles, and all of these are very important. So, a biogeochemical cycle is self-regulating, naturally occurring movements of chemical molecules through various sources and sinks. So, a biogeochemical is cycles through biotic and abiotic things. So, next up, we need to learn about the carbon cycle. So, this is a picture of the carbon cycle. So, carbon cycle is the movement of atoms and molecules containing the element carbon between sources and sinks. This is nitrogen cycle. It's basically, hold on, I'm actually going to go back to the carbon cycle. So you can see photosynthesis from the light, the sun, is going into the plant biomass. And eventually, of course, this is going to go into soil carbon. And eventually, obviously it'll reach down here. And then we got microbial respiration decomposition, which brings it back up and returns it to the air. And of course, respiration from the plant also returns it to the air. And then eventually humans also return emissions to the air. But this is more harmful and pollutant. We can also see this in the water, where photosynthesis, the light, brings it down here. We got ocean sediments, it goes down, but some of it recycles and goes back up into the air. Now you see these red numbers. These are harmful pollutants right here. Now we got the nitrogen cycle. So nitrogen cycle goes in a loop. And lightning causes nitrogen fixation, which returns it pretty much to the end of the cycle where it can go again. So the first thing in the atmosphere it goes through nitrogen fixation, which if we go to this key right here, it goes from NH4, also known as ammonium, to NO2 and NO3. So then, after nitrogen fixation, we got nitrogen-fixing bacteria. This is in the roots. So we get NH3, like we saw earlier. So NH3 is a modification from NH3 to NH4. So we got nitrification from NH3. So as we see, it's the NH4 to NO2 to NO3. We see that. NH3, NO2, NO3. Nitrification. This was nitrification. That was my bad. So then we got assimilation. Assimilation is absorption. So the roots absorb the NO3. We got ammonification over here from the animal because it eats stuff or it just dies, and its stuff goes into NH4, which eventually forms NO2. Absorption from animals, also from plants, also goes into the cycle. And you can see that little loop as well. Then finally, denitrification, which is the conversion of N2 by soil bacteria. And as you can see, it returns it to the atmosphere. So, next up is the phosphorus cycle. So, it can come from a volcano, as you see in this picture, or just sunlight and stuff like that. So, it's the movement of atoms and molecules containing the element phosphorus between sources and sinks, and it's also biogeochemical, and humans can disrupt this cycle. So, of course, we see ocean sediments, it goes into rocks, dissolved in soil, terrestrial food webs, and you can see a cycle here, they can go out of the cycle, and it's a big, complicated cycle. And I would try to remember, all this stuff, all the cycles, because it's very important. I mean, they won't talk to you much about the cycles, but it is very important to know the cycles, just in case you are asked on FRQ. So, next up is the hydraulic cycle, also known as the water cycle. Y'all know the water cycle. We got precipitation, we got evaporation, condensation. So, I mean, it's a lot, y'all should know this already. It's the movement of water through the 3 states of matter. So, precipitation, it's water. Evaporation, it's a gas. And condensation, it kind of turns into a solid. But kind of not really. It's like that stage between gas and solid. You don't really see solid, but that's what it says in the book. So, that's what AP wants you to know. So, I guess snow also counts like ice. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, we got primary productivity is next. So, primary productivity, we already talked about that earlier, I think, right? No, primary productivity we'll talk about in a later chapter. But the main thing you need to know is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis reaction is CO2 plus H2O is equal to O2. Forms O2 and glucose. So this is the glucose right here. And the cellular respiration reaction is just the exact opposite. So we have O2 plus glucose is going to equal that carbon dioxide in that water. So gross primary productivity minus cellular respiration of producers is equal to your net primary productivity, also known as JPP minus R equals MPP. So your gross primary productivity is your photosynthesis for producers. So it's your photosynthesis minus your cellular respiration is equal to your net primary productivity. And here are some important definitions. So primary productivity is just photosynthesis, and secondary productivity is just cellular respiration. Just switch those words out. They can be switched in and out. For cellular respiration, it's all life, while photosynthesis is just with producers. So cellular respiration can be with animals, carnivores, stuff like that. But photosynthesis can only happen with producers, such as plants. So the trophic levels. So there's trophic levels. So we got the primary producers, which are photosynthesizers, primary consumers, which are herbivores, secondary consumers, which are carnivores, tertiary consumers, which are apex predators, and decomposers, which are detrivores. And these will be mentioned again in units 8 and 9. So this is your trophic level pyramid. So solar energy goes straight towards the primary producers because of photosynthesis. Then we got primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. And you see it gets smaller every time because energy gets less and less. And if I could make them smaller, I could. But otherwise, you couldn't read the font. So really think about all of these being even half of what they are, and this one like a third. Like, so it should be like a slither. And then finally, detrivores consume this energy, and they actually gain a lot of energy because they consume a lot of energy and a lot of dead meat. Food webs and chains transfer energy, just like we saw. So when primary consumers eat plants, then you'll see energy transfer by the 10% rule. So eventually 10% of each so primary consumers gain 10% of energy from the primary producers. Secondary consumers gain 10% of energy from the primary consumers, and tertiary consumers gain 10% of the energy from secondary consumers. And you can see this when an organism consumes a source, it gains only 10% of that energy. So producers have the most energy, then herbivores, then carnivores, and apex predators. And detrivores are almost like to the side. So let's practice. A plant contains 1,000 joules. A herbivore contains this, and then it is consumed by a consumer. So calculate the amount of energy that consumer has. This consumer right here. This is a practice FRQ question, and we're going to do it together. So a plant contains 1,000 joules. Then a herbivore consumes that. So that means they only get 10%. So a quick way we can do this, and let me grab a quick pencil right here so that way I can help write it down and y'all should as well. So we have 1,000 joules in a plant, correct? So only 10% of that is actually going towards the consumer. So it's getting divided by 10. And when you do long division, you see only 100 is going towards that consumer, the herbivore. And that herbivore is then consumed as well. So only 10 of that goes to the next consumer. So the consumer only gets 10 joules of energy. Next example FRQ question wants us to identify the type of animal that gets the least amount of energy after consuming a source and explain why. So this is a detrivore because it is at the top of the pyramid that we saw earlier of the tertiary consumers. And that's it. If you can solve both of these questions and you know it, then you got it. And I'll see you tomorrow for Unit 2. Thank you all for watching, and this is the AP Review.